Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this webinar. Thank you for joining us for our remote recruitment discussion today. I'm hosting this webinar this morning on behalf of Zen Educate. I'm just going to bring up the next slide. There we go. I'm hosting this webinar this morning on behalf of Zen Educate. Zen Educate is an ethical alternative to traditional recruitment agencies, a certified social enterprise and Crown Services supplier. So today we're welcoming participant colleagues from across the UK, and we're welcoming a panel from the UK and over in Tbilisi in Georgia as well. I'll introduce you to our panel in just a few minutes. But we're delighted to be supporting colleagues across the UK in these very challenging days, which we realise everybody is endeavouring to do their best in. So the format today will be some brief introductions to the panel, followed by each panel member sharing their learning experiences and processes of recruiting staff remotely. Then we'll take some questions, and some of you have sent questions in already, which is great, so we're able to address those this morning already. If you have a question though, we'd really like you to type that in the Q&A box. So if you've not been on a Zoom webinar before, you'll see that there's a chat box and a Q&A box. So if you use the Q&A box for your questions for the panel, that's really helpful because I'll be able to see those and monitor those. And in the background, we've got Anjali from Zen Educate, who's here supporting us today. Thank you, Anjali.
No
if you want to add in the chat box any questions about what will happen next or how you can find out more, or any questions about the tech, then please put those over to Anjali and she'll respond to you there. So that will be really helpful for us. So let me introduce you to our panel this morning. So first of all, I'd like to welcome Rebecca Dunn. Rebecca is the Deputy Chief Exec at Prestonleigh Multi-Academy Trust in Bolton. Prestonleigh has a teaching school and a school-centred initial teacher training provision within the Trust and 5 primary schools. So welcome, Rebecca. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Nice to be here.
I'd also like to introduce James Blackwell. James is head teacher at Jericho Primary School in Cumbria. Previously head of Lark Hill School in Salford, and you're also an Ofsted lead inspector, James, so we really appreciate the experience that you bring from that as well. So welcome this morning.
Morning, Helen, welcome.
Thank you. And Steve Priest has very kindly joined us all the way from Tbilisi in Georgia. Steve is principal at the British International School, which is an all-through school from nursery to 6th form with children from over 40 different countries. Steve's a veteran when it comes to remote interviewing because having worked internationally for a long time, he's been doing remote interviewing for a long number of years. And he's no stranger to crises because he led the British School in Kathmandu through recovery after the 2015 earthquake. And so he's a veteran in more ways than one. So thanks again, Steve, for joining us this morning. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody.
Thank you. So this is a follow-on webinar from our Recruitment in a Crisis webinar, which helped highlight overarching trends in schools around recruitment at the moment. Our panellists have got extensive experience, as you can hear, from early years right through to secondary, rural, urban and coastal. So we're really pleased that we've got a good spread of experience. So the panellists are going to highlight some of their learning over the range of settings that they work in. And as I said, we've got some planned questions, but we're interested to hear your questions too. And we are going to be highlighting specific good practice around interviewing, and some of you have asked for that already, and some step-by-step case study work. So I'm going to begin by asking James to just spend a few minutes sharing the process that you've recently used for interviewing 3 positions at your school. And we've agreed that rather than talk through the process, because everybody can see the process on their screens, and we will send the slides out afterwards, by the way, so don't feel that you need to frantically take notes. You can just relax and enjoy. But James, we'd really like you to tell us, I've got 3 questions for you, James, so I'll tell you the questions now and then you can take them in a way that works for you. Why you selected these activities, what went really well and what on reflection would have made it even better.
Okay, so I'll start with why we selected the activities. And I think the first thing to say is that I'm a newbie when it comes to online interviewing. And this whole process was something that I've not experienced before. And I think none of my panel that we had that conducted the interviews had experienced that before. For a large amount of the candidates who were applying, we assumed that they hadn't had any experience. So I think the first thing around selecting the activities was thinking about our panel and for myself was to try and keep some of the tasks and some of the aspects of our interview process the same, so that we had confidence in what we were doing, because we didn't then need to worry about new tasks or adapting tasks. To look at the selection side of things, we wanted to keep an element of the process similar to what we normally do. So I think that's why I selected the different aspects of those tasks. The other thing to say around, we put an initial meeting in, as you can see from the slide, and that was really an opportunity because people didn't have an opportunity to look at the school. I did say prior to the selection process and the actual interview day that if people wanted to contact, then I did hold some Zoom meetings prior to that to give people an overview and a feel of our school and our environment. But we wanted a chance as a senior leadership team to talk to the candidates and just let them know what we were about, what we valued, and a little bit more. So that was an important aspect of why we selected the initial meeting as well. So the confidence and building confidence amongst the panel was really important. But then selecting the tasks themselves, we didn't just want to do a formal interview, and we don't do that in our school. We have quite a lengthy selection process. So we kept similar tasks to what we normally do. But one of the selection tasks that we chose to put in was to think about how, if we're not seeing teaching, what can we do as the next best thing? And I'm conscious that we put a lot of an interview process into thinking about looking and selecting based on teaching and seeing what happens in the classroom. And we didn't want to lose that. We knew that we couldn't replicate interaction with children. But what we tried to do was think, right, okay, well, what sort of task could we do to put in place? So we selected reading a story. And we actually asked them to prepare as if it was a guide like deliver online. And that for us was really key, because it helped us look at some things like the ability to select appropriate texts, the ability to select something appropriate for the year group. But more key was it really gave us an opportunity to see someone deliver something, whilst it wasn't perhaps a normal teaching and face-to-face interaction. The successful candidates really thought really clearly about that task, and were able to sort of share their personality. They were able to, you got a sense of their delivery. We also, some of the more successful candidates didn't just read the story, but they wrapped up an introduction. They checked in and pretend to check in with the children to say, hi, how are you? And so we really saw a sense of warmth or their personalities coming through there. So the actual selecting of activities, although it was similar to what we normally do, I actually felt, going on to your next question around what went well, they then worked really well for that reason, because it did get a sense of who we were interviewing and their personality and how they could potentially interact with our children. So the tasks did help us out there. Going on then to things that worked well. The other aspect, not just the story, but the handwriting of the letter, for example, worked well. We used that quite a lot, but we actually asked them to photograph and send a photograph of their handwritten letter. And for reasons such as we do look at grammar, spelling, punctuation, and so that worked well for us as well. So we didn't have to adjust that part of the task. And going back to then thinking then around the other aspect around managing what we might have thought about doing better, because that's always the thing, is reflecting and learning. And I think for us, one thing I think I underestimated was the use of technology. I think that was, for me, one of the things that I really did have to think about, because Zoom, for example, is a new concept to me, and managing Zoom in an interview, but also things that I planned the day and the tasks really well, but you can't get away from what technology brings on the day. So I think for myself, in terms of what would I have made it even better, I think actually really just being able to be familiar with the technology. So for example, I didn't realise with Zoom meetings that they cut you off if you're not a member. So with our very first interview, it stopped halfway through. So the part, and then also just things like the window cleaner appeared halfway through an interview as well. So there were just unknown things that the using technology sort of just brought a different dimension, really, to the interview process. And then just finally, really, I think in terms of reflecting on that aspect about what went well and reflecting about the future for us, what I have learned from this process is that I would certainly look at using aspects about this as we return back into life in the future. For me, certainly that aspect about asking people to present and record and video themselves in that scenario really gave us a sense of personality. And I think that I might use that in future as a way of looking at shortlisting. So we've taken that aspect around technology on board and are thinking about how in future we might use that for further recruitment.
Oh, that's really helpful. Thank you, James. And particularly interesting to hear about the kind of like small things that kind of rumble you on the day, like the window cleaner appearing, you know. But actually great that you found a way of managing the tasks. And actually one of the questions we had was about interview tasks remotely and how you can handle that, and suggestions of how to administer those. So I'm hoping that those people that asked that have heard some ideas. But if you've got follow-up questions, please put them in the Q&A box for us for later on. But that's really helpful, James, that you found that so much of people's personality and their kind of desire to engage and build rapport came across in those interviews, which is really helpful to hear.
Yeah, and I think just finally to say, I think what is that it was helpful because we did get that sense. So those people who had really thought about their stories and their presentations, it really did come through on their videos. So you still get that sense of what you might see when things go well for candidates, but you also get to see those people who haven't prepared as well, and so you do get that clear aspect from, or we did certainly, from the tasks.
Yeah, lovely. That's really helpful to hear. Thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to move on to Rebecca. I'm just going to check that I've got the right slide for you. Lovely. And Rebecca, you're recruiting currently staff and teacher trainees for the skit that you've got in the trust. So again, we'd really like to hear what's going well, and what areas of evidence gathering for recruitment are proving most challenging, and how you're working with those issues.
Yeah. So as you said at the beginning, Helen, we've got 5 schools in our trust which serve approximately 1,300 children and a lot of staff. I didn't mean to add it up before I started this, but I can't actually. It's a lot. It's quite a lot of staff. So we've got quite a high, not a high turnover of staff, but people come and go as you would expect. And it's we serve those schools are across 4 different local authorities. And yes, we also have a SCIT, which is school-centred initial teacher training, for anyone who isn't familiar with that. And currently we have 3 different hubs, one in Bolton, one in Knowsley, and one in Tameside, which are serving 58 trainees. So that's a lot of people. And we've recruited up to now 48 for a September start, which we're really proud of. So we interview a lot, is what I'm trying to say. But what we haven't done, as James said, is interview via Zoom before. So that is, you know, all new, and we've had to embrace it. And actually, I'm really proud of the team. Everyone's worked really hard and we've done really well, but we continue to do it. So we've had several teacher vacancies, which was successfully recruited to during this COVID period. Each of our head teachers has the authority to decide on the methods of recruitment, you know, with autonomy, with support from the trust if required. But, you know, none of those positions were for a senior leader, which was interesting. So I don't know about the other panelists, if they've had to, because I think there is a distinction here between recruiting for TAs and perhaps a general classroom practitioner, and then recruiting for a senior leader, interestingly. So none of our positions were for a senior position. But because we give that autonomy to our head teachers, they have done things in a number of different ways, and our SCIT have done things in different ways. And obviously those decisions are based on a number of different factors. So what the role is and the age range of the children, if there's any subject leadership that's part of that role, if it's fixed term or if it's permanent, if the candidates have previously worked there. But of course, all that needs to be fair and transparent. And just like we would if we were interviewing face-to-face, we generally have a scoring matrix which makes sure that it's a fair system, and we would give feedback in exactly the same way, either via telephone or video if requested, or written feedback, so that the candidates know where they stand. I think that a number of factors need to be taken into consideration when interviewing, not on site, and not with children, and that's what we're talking about here. Is, you know, one of the things that I was really conscious of is that we had to recognise that during this time, we don't understand or know what each person's individual journey has been like or continues to be like during these unprecedented times. And I don't like to use the word unprecedented because it's been used so many times, but a certain amount of empathy and mindfulness, I think, needs to be around the circumstances, needs to be understood. And I think doing an interview via video comes with its own set of issues, as James alluded to before, and all of those social cues of voice and intonation and body language, etc., gives the interviewer a lot of extra information that can be added to those verbal answers, which you don't necessarily always get. You know, people's eyes aren't looking at you because they're looking at who they're speaking at rather than looking at the camera, and you know, it is really difficult. And I don't know about anybody else, but when I first started to do this, I found myself completely distracted looking at myself. So I'd be looking at my roots and I'd be judging the bags under my eyes, and then I'd be looking at the backgrounds of people and where they were in their room, and what, you know, what books were on their shelves, etc. So it does take a little bit of getting used to, and if it takes a little bit of getting used to as the interviewer, then as the interviewee, that can be really stressful. So I suppose one of those things that we needed to do was make sure that we adapted our questions a little, just to make sure that we could quickly put people at ease and get them warmed up and feeling a little bit more comfortable with us. And that might be that we thought about the questions that we might ask them. You know, everyone usually starts with a tell us a little bit about yourself, but actually that just became that little bit more important because it allows someone to relax, and also telling them a little bit about you gives them a few seconds to breathe and settle in, if you like. Another one of the questions that some of our schools asked was, which I particularly liked, was if you overheard a colleague talking about you, what would they be saying? Because if that happened to me, I would want them to be saying that I was flexible and I was a team player and that I was conscientious and parents and children respected me and all of those things. So those answers were really interesting. And it just gave us another little insight, if you like, into what they were thinking and how they were feeling. I think video interviewing has made us more efficient and precise in our thinking, because you don't really overrun. You know, you're very conscious of people's time, and you know that they've logged on, and but it definitely has that downside, not seeing candidates with children. So we've definitely we've relied on references a little more, which is interesting, and doesn't mean that we didn't ordinarily take references into account. We did, but actually reading really carefully into those references, because we're relying on a head teacher's experience of observing those candidates teaching. So that's just a little difference, if you like. But obviously with NQTs or potential NQTs, they haven't had a teaching position, and at the moment we are struggling a little bit with, you know, our trainees haven't done their final placement in school, so their teaching, the time in the classroom has been reduced significantly, and yet they still need to get jobs in September. And we've been working really hard with our trainees to make sure that they are still learning and still teaching in lots of variety of different ways, still getting all the experience, still getting online lectures, still, you know, helping them to practice their interview techniques and all of those things, so that they can be successful and get a job for September, because they are ready and they will be absolutely fine, but possibly will need a little bit of extra support, which is absolutely fine and completely understandable. So the tasks that we've given them to do depends on the post. For some, they've been given a fixed timed task at shortlisting, which meant that we could ask them, it could fit in with their family commitments, if you like, and they could pick a slot, and we asked them to plan a reading lesson or a sequence of lessons, something like that, which worked really well. And for others, we've asked them to do a presentation, as I've explained on the slides, on something in particular, so a time when you found something difficult, or, you know, working with parents and those kinds of ideas, which again, it's just really nice to sit back and listen to them, and then you can ask questions related to that task that you'd given them to do, which worked really well for us. For our for our trainees, for our future teachers, now usually what we do is they have their interview process. They do a written task, a bit like James was saying. We ask them to answer a question, and then we carefully look at their answers, and we look at their grammar and their punctuation, their spelling, and all of those kinds of things as well. We ask them to do a maths task usually as well, and we ask them to do a mini teach in front of children. Now, again, you know, we've not been able to do that, but what we do have to remember is that universities have been recruiting trainee teachers for a long time and not putting them in front of children. So it is possible to do it in a different way, and one of the ways that we ask them to plan a lesson and then to talk us through it, and it has been really interesting. And remember that some of these people have had no experience in the classroom at all, so the very fact that they can plan a lesson, think it all through, and then some of them actually pretend they're doing the lesson to you, you know, which is really fun, but nerve-wracking for them, definitely nerve-wracking. So we've asked them to do that, and with regards to the written task and the maths paper that we generally ask them to do, we decided that if we felt that they could be successful, that we would do that more of a diagnosis of need, and we could do that in September, because actually no one's ever been rejected on doing, you know, not scoring particularly well on a maths test, because as long as in a previous life when they had to do a skills test, they've passed that, and now it's functional maths and literacy. But the maths and the written task really help us to diagnose need or a training need going forwards, and that just means that we can plug those little gaps as we go along for our trainee teachers. So it's worked really well, and I've been surprised at how well it has worked in actual fact. And like James said, we've definitely learned from this, and we'll continue to use Zoom or whatever platform in the future, because we've realised actually we don't always need to do face-to-face things.
Yeah.
But some of it can and does lend itself well to this kind of a platform. And I think the more that people use it, the better we've got at using it well, if you know what I mean.
That's really helpful. Thank you so much, Rebecca. You know, thanks for your time, and also thanks for the kind of very candid responses that you've given us. And I was very interested that one of the things you talked about was actually our own self-management during the interview process, and managing our own focus and distractions, particularly when a lot of us are spending a lot more time sat in front of a screen than perhaps we might choose to. So that's some really helpful practical advice and insights and future learning there. So thank you very much. Steve, as I said earlier, excuse me, Steve, remote interviewing has been business as usual for you for many years now. And your work goes from right from nursery through to sixth form. And you've outlined a really detailed process for us, which so we've got 3 slides to go through. But we're really interested to hear, what's your best advice for colleagues new to recruitment? So in other words, what do you wish you'd known when you were starting out? And we also note you've made a point about colleagues trained in safer recruitment. So we'd really like to hear about that. And we'd really like to know what feedback you get from candidates about the process that you use. So over to you, Steve.
Okay. Morning, everybody. A bit of context, I suppose, what went before remote interviewing. For us as international schools, trips to London, booking a hotel room, interview space, this was very expensive. And as the number of candidates and applicants that we had for our school increased, and the number that couldn't get to London increased, we realised that this was a lot of money for interviewing that was a waste in many respects. And it got to a stage in 2015, the last time I did London interviews, when 3/4 of the staff who we employed that year had not been interviewed face-to-face in London. So it's partly a financial decision there, and also obviously the practicalities of getting the right people. And if they're spread around the world, how do you get them all to London for an interview within 4 or 5 days? For us as international schools, it's important to get the right kind of person with respect to their experience, etc. So we're still looking for examples of planning and statements of philosophy, and if possible, a video of a lesson. But we're also, for us, it's very important to see the fit, how they will fit in the country with the current staff as well. And that is a difficulty when it comes to the online interview rather than the actual face-to-face meeting. We also start very early in our process. We're looking at November and December being our busiest time for recruitment. We want to get things out of the way nice and early. To look at those points that Helen kind of said specifically, the kind of best advice. First one is the most simple, really. Check the tech. Make sure that everything works, make sure that the applicant is comfortable with the tech that they're going to use. I mean, we interview people in different countries around the world, China included, so there are certain things that you can't use in China that everybody else can use. And it's important that an applicant is comfortable with the tech that you're going to use. It's an important decision for them to move to a different country and have a new job. So we're very flexible as to what tech we use. So Zoom is something new, but Skype, WhatsApp, and a variety of different applications are out there that you can use. Make sure it's going to work though. We obviously have certain Wi-Fi and power issues in countries like Georgia, and previously when I was in Kathmandu, that you probably or hopefully don't have to suffer from. Looking at the panel, limiting the number of people on your interview panel. We kind of recommend 2 active participants with a third, possibly a fourth as an observer, but jumping between different questioners, panel members can be stressful. And in a remote environment, when you've got your panel members in different parts of the city, in different houses and homes, it's going to be even more difficult. Don't try and squeeze in too many interviews per session. We try and make sure that there's an hour set aside for one interview. Generally, an interview lasts for 45 minutes, and then there's time to collect thoughts before the next one. Your brain needs time to decouple a little bit as well. As Rebecca was saying, you know, those distractions get more and more as you're doing more and more interviews a day. Your eyes stop working properly. Double checking the times with people. That's important for us because we're in a different time zone. Good afternoon, everybody, as I would say. Really reinforcing beforehand that applicants have read everything that we've provided to try and cut down as much as possible on those questions that you have actually already provided the answer to in writing. It's important, though, that they get a feel for the school, and that's why we go for the 2-stage interview with the informal and the formal. And I'll tell you a bit more about that in the feedback section. But getting a feel for your school is important, and they're not necessarily going to get that from the boss. They need to get that from other people in a more relaxed environment. And that's possible when you're doing face-to-face interviews in a school, to have a tour with somebody who isn't the senior leader and try and get a better picture for yourself as an applicant. We also have to remember that people aren't taking the day off for an interview. If they're traveling to your school for a normal on-the-day interview, they're probably taking the whole day off. They're preparing for it. They're ready to concentrate on that interview for one full day. But the short period of time that we're looking at with an online interview means that they're squeezing it into their normal day. We're flexible with times because we don't want them to have to miss out on their teaching or miss out on whatever they need to do during the day. So we're very flexible over times, but then that does mean that they might be squeezing their interview in between lessons, and they're not necessarily going to be as relaxed as they will be, or perhaps as mentally well prepared for the interview process. On that point, though, about them kind of the short time and the fact that they're not taking a day off work for this is an issue that I kind of would say it's about commitment, in that it's very easy to commit to an interview when it's only going to take you an hour. Yeah, you've made your application, you've been offered an interview. It's very easy to say yes when you're not actually as 100% committed to the job as you would be if you were going to make a physical journey to go to an actual job interview. Helen mentioned safer recruitment. As international schools, and we're a Colbis patrons accredited school, we all have to be very aware of safeguarding and safer recruitment, just as you are in the UK. It's very important that all our panel members have done safer recruitment training, and we do ensure that safeguarding questions are asked. And as an international school, we are doubly checking references. We are ringing up principals in different countries around the world to make sure that those safeguarding questions are asked. But again, reinforcing the point that Rebecca made, that intuition that you have about a person is much more difficult when you're doing it on screen. Yeah. Feedback from candidates. The feedback that I've got from the people who've been successful is always going to be better than those that are unsuccessful, but they tend to like the 2-stage informal formal structure. it does allow them to ask different people different things. And we very much make it clear from the start that what we call the informal interview is for them to ask those questions or have a discussion about subject-specific things or key stage-specific things for primary, an opportunity for them to talk about the specifics of learning that is going on within a subject area in the school, but also ask questions, asking those questions that they wouldn't really want to ask the principal, the head teacher in the formal interview, and get some of those questions out of the way, like, well, what is life like in Tbilisi, etc., that they can ask of a normal teacher, perhaps. They do appreciate the flexibility, the fact that they don't have to take a day off work to do this. They appreciate flexibility in time. I've done online interviews at 6:30 a.m. our time all the way through to 9 p.m. our time, because we're catering to, we might be employing or interviewing people in South America or in Japan. But there is, that difficulty that some candidates say and have been able to get a feel for the place, like you can if you go for a walk round a school when you're on that school tour part of the interview. Surprises that I've actually surprised how smooth it's gone. I don't think, I can't really think that there's been any difference in the quality of the people we've employed pre and post doing online interviews. And I wouldn't really change my mind now. I think with financial constraints, and now this year with COVID, I just want us to get better at it and make it a more smooth process, because it's full of glitches at times and full of little difficulties that crop up. Yeah, like James said about window cleaners and things like that appearing mid-interview. Okay.
That's really helpful. Thanks, Steve. And your breadth of experience and longevity of experience is particularly interesting. And also the flexibility that that you've always had to show, really, but that you're able to show now, and the sensitivity towards other people's, as all of you have raised, really, sensitivity towards other people's situations, including time zones and previous experiences. So that's really helpful. Thank you. We've got some questions coming in. And I'm going to suggest that rather than everybody answer every question, we might look at how people might want to volunteer from the panel. Oh yeah, I think I can help out with that. And perhaps we'll have 2 answers to each question. I think that might be good. So the first one we've got is how do we address the lack of assurance of being able to observe a lesson being delivered live? So it really, I know a number of you kind of covered it already with some of the things that you've done, but that's the kind of nub of it. How do we address that lack of assurance? Because it's not just about seeing the actual lesson, it's about the rapport building and some of those aspects. So would one of you like to volunteer to have a go at that for us?
I will.
Thank you, Rebecca.
I think that as teachers, we are people persons. We are used to speaking with people and building rapport quickly with parents, with children, with other professionals. So it's not that that you can't do this and you can't do it quickly. And I think that we are all experts at that anyway. I think that the difficulty comes, when I teach, if I teach nursery or I teach our trainee teachers, it's very similar. I still have to do the same kinds of things to build rapport with 3-year-olds as I do to build rapport with a group of adults that I'm trying to teach, is what I'm trying to say. So the fact that we can put our candidates at ease and they can talk through a process, either a lesson plan or a presentation or read a story, you do get a really good idea of what they would be like in front of children. You do. The only things that we're not seeing is the kinds of things that you would want them to do with children. So you would want them to introduce themselves. You would want to see that they could manage the behaviour of those children, so they're not having to demonstrate that. And that is a big thing, and is something that perhaps you might need to work with that candidate on in the future. You just don't know. It's a risk, isn't it? That's what I'm saying. But employing anyone, it's always a risk.
Yeah.
And doing it in this way, you know, we're expecting people to act in a professional manner. In a non-professional setting, they're sat at home in their dining room quite often, or a cupboard, or like me with my laundry in the background. Because they haven't got an office and they can't shut themselves away, and the dog will bark and all of those kinds of things. So I think that we're doing the best that we can. You do the best that you can, and you try and make sure that you cover those things that you know there are going to be gaps in as best you can, and that's all you can do.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Rebecca. Thanks for that. Did anybody else want to pitch in there?
I think just to follow on from Rebecca, really, one of the things that I thought about in the process is that when we see teachers teach for an interview in person in our school, it's also an unreal situation as well, because they don't know the children, they don't know the school, they don't know our systems or processes. So there's also that tends to give you one side to a story as well. So I think that I think we've seen just another element to a side of a story, really, that people bring. So it's as Rebecca said, you know, the future and how we nurture and mentor, and we begin to work with these people, hopefully in September or whenever we return. That's when the stories begin to unfold. But I don't think that replacing teaching, it's just looking at a different aspect and gaining different points of and different viewpoints in the story. Really, I think one of the things that I listened to when Stephen was talking was around the success that he's had in doing this, and his view is that actually the recruitment process going online has been successful. So I think, you know, I take heart in that hopefully I've got it right moving forward. So I think it's just about looking at it in a different perspective.
That's helpful. Thank you, James. Thank you. Okay. We've got a question here, which I'm going to pitch to Steve, actually, from Andrew. Thanks, Andrew, for your question. So would you consider a walk with a mobile device or recorded tour of your school to allow the candidates to see the school and generate interaction as part of the interview process?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, actually. I mean, we send out a video to applicants. It's a multi-purpose marketing video. It goes to parents as well. It shows you the school and shows you some of the things that's going on. So it's a bit over polished, to be honest. It's only going to show you the nice bits, isn't it? But I think, yes, that is a good idea to do a walk around as part of the interview. And it's not actually one that I'd really considered before, but I can see that, you know, today I'm in school. If I was interviewing, we could wander around and talk about what we see in different classrooms, even though there's no children there. But and it can stimulate that kind of discussion, which is, you know, an important part of any interview, isn't it? The discussion, rather than just answering the questions. The discussion is the most important part.
Absolutely. Thanks for that, Steve. Okay. Rebecca or James, do either of you want to jump in on that question?
I think if just having reflected on it just briefly, then I think I would agree with Steve. It's a good idea, and I think at the start of my interview process, you saw that we conducted an informal meeting. That was where SLT, we each took an aspect of school life, and I think we could have probably enhanced that aspect in our informal start by having a look in the classrooms or and talking about some of the approaches and the decisions and procedures and things that we have within our school. We could have highlighted that a little bit more by having a tour of the school. looking at our working walls and our approaches to the classroom, etc. So yeah, I can see how that would be really useful.
Okay, thanks. So thanks, Andrew, for the question and the idea. That's really appreciated. We've got another question from Andrew, which is that so far we've had 2 options put forward for receiving presentation and tasks, so either a live video or recorded. And does the panel think that a recorded video gives as much information as a live presentation remotely?
Yeah, I can jump in there. I've been involved in doing these pre-recorded videos. Due to time differences, never done a live videoing of somebody's lesson or of a particular presentation. But we have had pre-recorded videos of lessons and presentations. They, obviously, a candidate has the chance to polish and redo. They can send you the best one rather than the one that is really happening there. But there's only a certain amount of time that they can, a certain number of times that they can remake that video, particularly if it is of a lesson. There are also, some schools won't allow teachers to record and send away video, so that has to be considered as part of the process. When you if you're requesting of a teacher to do that, if they're in this certain school, they might not be able to do that. But I would say that the benefits of the pre-recorded lesson or presentation outweigh the risks of something going wrong in a live presentation or a live recorded lesson.
Oh, that's very helpful insight, actually. And I suppose I'm thinking that when people do get the opportunity to, as you say, kind of put their best effort forwards, actually you see their best effort, don't you? And actually, we want to see candidates. We want candidates to have an opportunity to shine, don't we? So I appreciate your point, Steve, actually, about the the benefits that can come from pre-recorded outweigh the risks. That's really helpful. Rebecca or James, did you want to jump in on that?
You did just remind me of something that one of our head teachers had said, not necessarily about a video, but that they felt that one of the candidates was reading from notes when answering the questions. And I suppose, normally when you're preparing for something, you do write notes for yourself, and that's perfectly acceptable. And in actual fact, so it was just an interesting discussion as to how the head teacher felt about that. I'm kind of on the fence in that, well, actually, I would expect them to have prepared and to have written notes and to have practiced and all of those things. And if they happen to have those notes in front of them because they're really nervous and that helps them to relax, and then to me that's fine. But this particular head teacher felt that next time if she was doing it, she would specify clearly that no notes were, that they weren't to use notes in front of them during the interview. So I don't know how anybody else feels about that. It was just interesting, that's all.
Yeah, it is interesting. That might just generate a little bit of interest and controversy and reflection as well. James, you'll have to throw your answer in there. What's your view on that?
I think in terms of the using notes, I actually think it's about, as to use your phrase, Helen, it's about how you want people to shine. So I think it's about particularly using online situation. I think we heard Stephen talk about the welfare of everyone involved. And I think if you're going to let people shine, then it's actually about recognizing that people do feel confident in using notes or tools. Then I think that why not? I think it's about trying to get people to show their best. And then just coming back to that recorded versus live question, I think one of the things there for me is that I think it's about then thinking as the person putting together the package of the interview process, it's about maybe using both and a mixture of both to see, again, the different sides of a candidate and how they react in different circumstances. I think that's certainly my experience. Was I managed to have a bit of a recorded video and a recorded aspect to it, but also a live, more formal stage of interviewing. And I think that gave us a real depth and breadth around what we did. So I don't think it's one over the other. I think it's about maybe thinking about how you could use both.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. Okay, I've got 2 more questions which came in prior. I'm going to read them both out, and people, you can have a think about which you'd like to contribute to. One is whether you've got suggestions of how socially distanced interviews could take place. So interested to know your thoughts on that. I think particularly when more children are back in school, that's going to be more challenging. And the other question, and I think this is probably from somebody who's looking for interviews at the moment, because their question is, what is the best type of experience to use to answer the question, what is one memorable success you've experienced whilst teaching? Okay, so we've got one that sounds very much from a teacher kind of seeking a panel view about the kind of best answers, and one about socially distanced interviews. So having given you a chance to kind of think through those, would anybody like to have a go at responding to one of those for us?
I think some head teachers are conducting socially distanced interviews. If you know, just from reading around on Twitter and Facebook and things. At the moment, our schools are not accepting visitors.
Okay.
And until that guidance changes, we won't change the way that we're doing that at the moment. And that doesn't mean that it won't change in a few weeks' time or by September or whatever, because I think it's entirely possible to do a socially distanced interview. But as we've discussed, I don't think it's necessary. So it's certainly, you know, it would be a risk, and it depends on how much of a risk you want to or you're willing to take, I think, at the moment.
Okay, thanks, Rebecca.
Just to echo that, Rebecca, I think being back in school at the moment, I know, having written various and numerous risk assessments to allow us to come back, I think it's about the situation that you work in, and where that interview takes place. I certainly know that we're not letting anyone on our site without prior permission. So it's about respecting our own staff teams, our own parents, and thinking very carefully about all involved before allowing any sort of social distancing interview to take place. And then I think the other thing to think about there is that for many schools that haven't started coming back yet with children, it's about if you then start thinking about socially distancing and putting elements within and asking children to partake, then it's thinking about mental health needs all involved, because it's an unknown time for us and we're all feeling our ways. So I think it's about social distancing. Interviewing has to be taken probably very cautiously and very carefully, and thinking about everyone that's involved or affected by the process.
It sounds like both of you would regard that as an unnecessary risk at the moment.
Yeah.
I think I would, yes.
Okay. All right, thank you. Okay, and what about the teacher who's saying, you know, when somebody asks what's a memorable success you've had when teaching, what are you listening for? What are you hoping to hear there, and what advice could you give that person?
Shall I jump in on first? I think it's about their learning. I really like to hear the story about how something went wrong and how they learned from it and how they changed it, did it better next time, or reacted on the spot, etc. You know, the various different permutations there. But yeah, something went wrong and they learned a lot from it.
Okay, that's really helpful to hear, because it means that you're not just seeking for kind of success all the time, marvellous me. Actually, your focus is on the learning. So that's really helpful. Thanks, Steve. Rebecca and/or James?
I would say it's so adding to that, it's that resilience, isn't it? So you want them to know, you know, so listening out for where something's been difficult or tricky, but they've not given up and they've perhaps changed their thinking or their way of doing something. And it's really, it really is that kind of evaluation process of something, of thinking, the why something hasn't worked and what else I could try in order to try and be successful.
Oh, that's really helpful.
And that can come across in loads of different ways. You know, people often talk about just a child who's found it difficult to read, or even engaging with a difficult parent, or a parent who, you know, for whatever reason doesn't engage, or it could be a whole, you know, a subject of geography that they find difficult to teach because they haven't got the subject knowledge, or whatever it can be, you know. But I suppose those are the key things that I would be listening for.
That's helpful. Thank you, Rebecca. James?
I think, and really just to build on what Rebecca and Stephen have said, I think for me, it's always about sharing honest stories. Honest stories that you can truly reflect on, because it's about when you're truly honest, I think that's when you give your best examples, and certainly come across more strongly in an interview situation.
That's really helpful, thank you. So we've got learning from failure, reflection, reprocessing, trying out new ideas, and actually a really powerful point about authenticity and honesty. So thanks all three of you for those answers, are really helpful answers there. And for whoever asked that, I hope you found that really helpful with your interviews going forward. We're coming really near to the end of our time, perfect timing actually. So I'm...
Helen, you've muted yourself. Sorry, let me just...
Sorry about that, everybody. I muted myself while I was clearing my throat earlier. I'm so sorry about that. So can you all see my screen still? Is that okay? Yeah. So just to finish off really by saying thanks so much to our panel, to Steve and Rebecca and James for joining us today. And thank you to all the participants who have come and logged in today. If you want to know more about us, you can see there's contact information there on the slide I've got for you. And we'd love to hear your feedback from this session, so do send your feedback in. We'd love to hear about that too. We hope it's been really helpful, and we wish you every success with your future remote interviewing. And I will just finish off by saying thanks so much to Anjali and to the team at Zen who helped set this up, and again, of course, to our panel. So thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Helen. Just to jump in, I think your screen slides disappear. I might be wrong, it might be my view. But if the attendees didn't catch it, you can follow us in Zen Educate. You can follow Zen Educate on Twitter for news about upcoming, there we go.
There we go.
Yeah, for news about future webinars, and also send in your suggestions of what are the topics that you want to see for the next few months. But yeah, thank you to all the panelists for taking the time to speak today, and for the attendees, I hope you got useful insights. Thanks so much, Helen.
Okay, thanks very much, everybody. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.